I remember the first time I received the call. It wasn't anything out of the ordinary at first, just a ringing phone at an hour when most people would be asleep. I didn't think much of it. We've all had those late-night calls that turn out to be telemarketers or wrong numbers. But this time, something felt off from the moment I picked up the phone. The silence on the other end was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It wasn't the typical dead air you get from an accidental dial. No, this was different. It was like the phone itself was waiting for something to happen. Something unnatural. I waited for what felt like forever before a soft, raspy voice finally spoke. At first, it sounded like a whisper, so faint I could barely make out the words. "Do you hear it?" I didn't respond right away. My heart skipped a beat, and my mind scrambled to make sense of what had just happened. Who was this? And why was it so hard to understand them? But before I could process anything, the voice repeated itself, clearer this time, as if the speaker was forcing the words out with difficulty. "Do you hear it? It's coming closer." I tried to speak, to ask who they were, but my words caught in my throat. The voice had a strange effect on me, pulling me deeper into a feeling of dread I couldn't shake. It wasn't just the words themselves. It was the tone, the raspiness, that seemed to come from somewhere dark, somewhere far away. I felt cold, as though the air around me had turned icy, though nothing had changed. No open windows, no draft, just an overwhelming chill that settled deep inside me. I wanted to hang up, but something stopped me. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe a foolish sense of responsibility. I had to know who this was. What was happening? Before I could gather my thoughts, the voice spoke again, this time louder, more insistent. "It's getting closer now. Can you hear it?" I could barely breathe as the words sank in. A sudden unease gripped my chest. My eyes darted around the dark room, searching for something I couldn't explain. It was as though the walls themselves were closing in. I glanced at the clock. It was 2:37 a.m., the dead of night. My phone had a strange buzzing sound, as if it was picking up interference, a frequency it shouldn't have been able to. I should have hung up. I should have cut the call and forgotten about it. But instead, my finger froze over the end call button. Something compelled me to stay on the line, as though I couldn't break free from whatever was speaking to me. I felt my pulse racing, my mind becoming clouded with confusion and fear. Then, as if responding to my own internal panic, the voice let out a low chuckle. It was faint at first, but it grew louder and more sinister with every passing second. "You don't know what's coming, do you?" the voice asked, sending a shiver down my spine. "It's already here, and there's nowhere to run." I could hardly think, let alone speak. My eyes were wide, scanning the shadows that now seemed to dance unnaturally around me. I tried to swallow, but my throat felt tight. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting, watching from the darkness. Suddenly the line went dead. I didn't hang up. The call ended on its own. I sat there for a moment, staring at the phone in my hand, unable to move. My head was spinning, and a cold sweat broke out along my skin. That voice, that feeling. It didn't feel like a simple prank or some prank call. No, this felt real, too real. And it left me with one haunting thought. Whatever it wasn't done with me. I didn't know then, but that phone call was just the beginning of something much worse, something I couldn't have prepared for. The next time my phone rang in the middle of the night, I would wish I had never picked it up at all. The next night, the phone rang again. I had barely closed my eyes after what had happened the previous evening. I tried to convince myself that it was just some prank, or that I had imagined the voice on the other end. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It was as though the night itself was holding its breath, waiting for the phone to ring again. I had just finished dinner when the shrill tone of my phone cut through the silence of my room. My heart dropped. I froze, staring at the phone screen, willing it to stop. But it didn't. It kept ringing. For a moment, I debated whether to answer or not. Maybe it was just a coincidence, a random call from someone trying to sell something. But the memory of the last call, the eerie voice, kept playing in my head, and I knew I couldn't ignore it. I had to know what it was. My fingers trembled as I reached for the phone, my mind telling me not to, but my curiosity pushing me forward. I answered the call, my voice a little shaky. "Hello?" The line was quiet at first, the silence pressing down on me, making my skin crawl. I almost considered hanging up, but then I heard it, the faintest whisper, just barely audible, but unmistakable. "Are you ready?" My breath caught in my throat. I knew that voice. It was the same one from the night before. That rasping, breathless voice that seemed to be coming from somewhere far, far away. But at the same time, so close, it felt like it was right next to me. I glanced around my room, trying to shake the dread that was creeping up my spine, but everything looked the same, silent, still, undisturbed. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. The voice didn't answer me directly. Instead, it spoke again, its tone low and haunting. "It's coming closer. You won't be able to escape." The words hung in the air, echoing in my mind. My thoughts began to race. What was happening? Who was this person, or thing, on the other end of the line? And why me? "Please just tell me who you are," I pleaded, my pulse quickening. My chest tightened, and I could feel a cold sweat beginning to form on the back of my neck. There was something so unsettling about this voice, something that felt otherworldly. A slow, sickening chuckle crackled through the phone. "You won't be able to hide from it. Not anymore." The phone line suddenly went dead, leaving me in a state of shock and confusion. I stood there for a moment, staring at the screen, unsure of what just happened. It wasn't like a normal hang-up. The call had just ended. There was no dial tone, no nothing, just silence. I stood motionless, the weight of the moment pressing on me like a physical force. I wanted to tell myself it was nothing, that I was just overthinking it, imagining things. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just my imagination. Something was happening, something I couldn't explain, and it was getting closer. As I tried to gather my thoughts, the room felt colder. The walls seemed to close in on me, and the air felt thick, as if it were charged with something I couldn't quite comprehend. My head started to spin, and for a moment, I wondered if I was going crazy. Maybe it was stress. Maybe it was the lack of sleep. But then, my phone buzzed again. I nearly jumped out of my skin. I didn't want to answer it. I was scared, terrified, in fact. What if it was the same voice again? What if it was worse this time? But as the phone continued to buzz in my hand, I realized something. I couldn't stop myself. I had to know what was happening. With a shaky hand, I pressed the answer button. "Hello?" I said, my voice barely audible. There was a long pause, longer than before. and I could feel my heartbeat in my ears, deafening and irregular. The air in the room felt suffocating, like I was drowning in it. And then the voice came through again. But this time, it was different. This time, it was closer. "Can you hear it?" the voice asked. It was barely more than a whisper, but the words seemed to vibrate in my skull. "It's here." My breath caught in my throat. The room felt smaller now, as though something unseen had filled the space. I couldn't explain it, but I could feel a presence, something in the air that wasn't supposed to be there. "I don't understand," I said, the words coming out strained. "What do you mean it's here? Who is this?" "You already know," the voice whispered back. "You've always known." I felt the ground beneath me shift, like I was standing on unstable soil. My mind raced to understand, but it was as if something was blocking my thoughts. It was hard to concentrate, hard to think through the overwhelming sense of dread. The phone in my hand seemed to grow heavier, as if it were pulling me down into something dark and deep. Suddenly, a loud crackling sound filled the line. It was so loud that I had to pull the phone away from my ear for a moment. When I put it back, the voice had changed. It was no longer just a whisper. Now, it was a low growl, one that seemed to come from within the very walls of my room. "Look behind you," it said, the words drenched in malice. I froze. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. For what felt like an eternity, I stood there, paralyzed, staring at the wall behind me. I couldn't bring myself to turn around. My body felt like it was made of stone, unable to respond to my frantic thoughts. And then I heard it. A faint sound, barely perceptible, but unmistakable. A shuffle, a whisper, a slow dragging noise. I didn't need to look. I could feel it, feel a presence moving behind me. My pulse was erratic, my hands shaking uncontrollably. My mind screamed at me to turn around, to face whatever it was, but I couldn't. I just couldn't. The voice on the other end of the phone laughed, low, guttural, and filled with an unsettling satisfaction. "You've already met it," the voice whispered. "And now, it's waiting for you." The call ended abruptly, leaving me in stunned silence, my heart racing, my thoughts a blur of terror. The room around me felt colder now, and I could sense the weight of something unseen pressing in on me. The walls seemed to close in further, and the air was thick with dread. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was in the room with me, something that shouldn't be. And just like that, I understood. This was no ordinary prank, no mistake. This wasn't something I could just ignore. Whatever it wasn't going away. The following day, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. It wasn't just the phone calls anymore. It was the strange presence that had followed me, the invisible weight that hung in the air every time I tried to settle into normality. I spent the entire day trying to convince myself that it was just my mind playing tricks on me. I even tried to distract myself with work, but the feeling of being watched, of something lurking just beyond my reach, refused to fade. At night, I hesitated to pick up the phone when it rang, my hands clammy and my heart pounding in my chest. But as the hours stretched on and the silence in my room became unbearable, I knew the calls would come, and I knew I would answer them, because deep down I needed to know. I needed to understand. When the phone rang that night, I froze. My breath caught in my throat, and my instinct screamed at me to leave it unanswered. but curiosity gnawed at me. I had to face whatever this was, no matter how terrifying. I had to confront the unknown. With trembling hands, I picked up the phone. "Hello?" I said, my voice trembling, despite my best efforts to stay calm. There was a long pause, the silence stretching until it felt suffocating. And then finally, the voice came through. It was the same rasping whisper, but this time, it was different. There was an eerie calmness to it, as though it knew exactly what I was thinking. There was no fear in the voice now, just something darker, something more calculated. "You still don't get it, do you?" the voice said, the words sliding through the phone like ice. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breathing. "Who are you? What do you want?" The voice didn't answer my question. Instead, it said something that made my blood run cold. "Do you remember the first time you heard me?" "The first time you heard my voice?" it asked, the tone laced with something I couldn't quite place. It wasn't just mockery, it was something deeper, something older. I clenched the phone tightly, a knot forming in my stomach. The first time I heard the voice. I had to think. I closed my eyes, replaying the events in my mind. The first call, the night everything started. And then it hit me. I had been thinking about it all wrong. This wasn't a stranger. This wasn't a random prank. This wasn't even some supernatural force trying to torment me. No, this was something far more personal. Something tied to my past. Something I had buried deep within myself. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. "Who are you?" I repeated, more urgently this time, my voice cracking under the weight of the truth. "You know exactly who I am," the voice replied, its tone thick with a sense of finality. "You've known me for a long time." My mind raced. Who could this be? Who had I known? Who had I forgotten? Who was on the other end of this phone, pulling the strings, pushing me into a corner where I couldn't escape? It was as if the voice was playing a game, one where the stakes were my sanity. I pulled the phone away from my ear for a moment, my pulse racing as I tried to think through the fog of panic. The room around me felt distorted, the edges of my vision growing blurry as I fought to breathe. This wasn't just a random occurrence. No, this was deliberate. This was planned, and it had to be connected to something in my past. Suddenly, I remembered. A name. It was a name I hadn't thought of in years. A name that had haunted my childhood. A name that had been buried under layers of time and suppressed memories. A name I never wanted to remember. But now, it was crashing back into my consciousness like a wave. "Ben?" I whispered, almost afraid to speak the name aloud. The voice on the other end of the phone let out a low chuckle, a sound that made my skin crawl. "You remember now, don't you?" "Ben, my older brother. He had died when I was just a child. I'd only been 6 years old at the time, but the memories of him were burned into my mind. He had been the closest person to me, my protector, my guide. And then one night, he was gone. No one could explain how or why. He had been found in our house, lying on the floor, a look of terror frozen on his face. No one could figure out what had happened to him. The doctors said it was a freak accident, a sudden heart attack brought on by stress or something else. But I knew better. I had known something was wrong, but Ben's death was just the beginning of the mystery. The strange events started after his death. Strange phone calls, whispers in the dark, objects moving on their own. I had chalked it all up to my own overactive imagination. the trauma of losing my brother. But now, the truth was coming back, and I could feel it, the presence that had followed me all these years. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't something supernatural. It was Ben. Ben's spirit had never left, and it had been trying to reach me for all this time. "You're still angry," the voice continued, its tone now thick with bitterness. "You never understood, did you, what really happened that night?" I felt the room spin. My mind couldn't comprehend the gravity of what I was hearing. Ben was dead. Ben had been dead for years. How could this voice be him? How could this be happening? My chest tightened as the weight of the revelation began to settle in. "What are you talking about?" I gasped, my voice breaking under the strain. "What happened to you? Why are you doing this?" "You never listened," the voice hissed. "You never understood the truth. You never asked the right questions. All these years, you've ignored the signs. But I'm here now, and you will understand. You will finally know what happened." My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to process the words. The truth was finally coming to light, and it was worse than I could have ever imagined. I had spent my life running from the truth, hiding from the fear of facing what happened to Ben. But now, there was no escaping it. The past had come crashing back into my life, and I couldn't deny it any longer. "I'm sorry," I whispered, tears welling up in my eyes. "I never meant for any of this." The voice softened for a moment, almost as if it were pitying me. "You should have listened. You should have asked." And then, in an instant, the line went dead. The silence that followed was deafening. I stared at the phone in my hand, still holding it, as if the call had just ended. My thoughts were a whirlwind of confusion, fear, and grief. Ben, my brother. His spirit had never left, and now it had come back to finish what was started. The phone call had been a message, a warning, and the truth was worse than I could have ever imagined. I couldn't sleep that night. The weight of the revelation about Ben, the memories I had buried for so long, kept me wide awake, my thoughts spiraling out of control. The phone call had shattered something deep inside me, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep pretending that everything was okay. But what terrified me even more than the call itself was the feeling that this wasn't over. Ben's voice on the phone had been the beginning of something far darker, something I couldn't yet understand. The next few days felt like an endless loop of dread. I went about my daily routine, but the fear of hearing that voice again was always present, lurking just beneath the surface. Every ring of the phone sent my heart racing, and every quiet moment in the house felt suffocating. It was as if the walls were closing in on me, as if I was being watched at all times. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting, that whatever Ben had started was only going to escalate from here. And then it happened again. It was late one night when the phone rang once more. I had been trying to sleep, but the exhaustion weighed heavily on me, making it hard to focus on anything other than the gnawing fear that had become my constant companion. I stared at the phone on my nightstand, the number on the screen unfamiliar and unlisted. My hand trembled as I reached for it, knowing deep down that I couldn't ignore it. I couldn't escape this. "Hello?" My voice was barely a whisper, thick with dread. At first, there was nothing but the static hum of the line. My heart beat erratically in my chest, and I strained my ears, hoping to hear something, anything. But all I could hear was that low, unsettling noise, like a faint whisper in the background. And then, just as I thought the call might have dropped, I heard it. The voice. "Did you really think it was over?" The voice said, its tone cold and menacing. My stomach churned. It was Ben again, or what had become of him. It wasn't just a voice now. It was an entity, something alive with dark intent. I was frozen in place, the phone pressed to my ear, as if I could somehow control the situation by staying still, by not reacting. "You should have listened," the voice continued, its words laced with anger. "You've always ignored me, haven't you? But now, you'll understand. I'm not going away. I will make you listen." I could feel the air in the room grow colder, and my breath came in shallow gasps. It was as if something was reaching out from the other side of the phone, pulling me into a darkness that I couldn't escape. I tried to speak, to ask what was happening, but the words caught in my throat. The voice laughed then, a hollow, echoing sound that sent chills down my spine. "You don't understand yet, do you? You think I'm just a memory, a ghost from your past? But I'm more than that. I am your mistake, your regret, the one thing you never fixed, and now it's time to pay for it." "Stop," I choked out, my mind scrambling to find some form of logic in the madness. "Stop this. What do you want from me?" "I want you to remember," the voice hissed, its tone sharp, like nails on a chalkboard. "I want you to remember what you did." That stopped me cold. What did I do? What had I forgotten? My heart pounded so loudly in my ears that I could barely hear the voice anymore. My mind raced, trying to piece together fragments of a memory that refused to fully materialize. There was something, there had to be, something I did or didn't do that had caused all of this. I had been too young to understand at the time. I had blocked it out, locked it away in the deepest corners of my mind. But now, the voice was demanding that I remember. The phone call abruptly ended, cutting off mid-sentence, leaving only the silence in its wake. I sat there, in stunned disbelief, the receiver still pressed to my ear, my body numb with fear. The room felt smaller, suffocating, as if it was closing in on me. I was losing control. The more I tried to resist, the more I felt the past pulling me under, dragging me back into the darkness I had so desperately tried to forget. I had to know what this was. I had to understand what Ben was trying to tell me before it consumed me completely. The next morning, I didn't go to work. I couldn't. I was too terrified of being alone, of being trapped in this nightmare that had taken hold of me. I decided to revisit my childhood home, hoping that being in that place might help me remember something, anything, that could explain this. But as I drove toward the old house, a sense of dread settled over me. I had no idea what I would find there, but I knew that I couldn't run from it anymore. The house was just as I remembered it. The peeling paint, the overgrown yard, the broken porch light. It looked abandoned, forgotten, like the years had slowly chipped away at it. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and a cold wind swept through the trees, making the branches creak. I stepped out of the car and walked toward the front door, my steps echoing in the silence. The door creaked open when I pushed against it, revealing the same old wooden floors and dust-covered furniture I hadn't seen in years. Everything was just as it had been when I left. The place felt alive with something I couldn't name. I wandered through the house, my footsteps hollow against the floorboards as I searched for answers. I moved toward the basement, Ben's old room, the one place I hadn't dared go in all these years, but I couldn't avoid it anymore. I needed to confront the truth. I descended the stairs, my hand gripping the railing for support. The air grew heavier the further I went, as though the house itself was holding its breath. At the bottom of the stairs, I stopped. The door to Ben's room stood ajar, and from the crack, I could hear a faint, unsettling sound, like whispers. I pushed the door open. The room was empty, except for the remnants of old furniture, the worn-out bed, and a few scattered toys from Ben's childhood. But there, in the corner of the room, was something I hadn't noticed before. Something small, barely noticeable at first, but enough to send a wave of nausea through me. A phone, an old, dusty phone. It sat there on the floor, untouched, as if waiting for someone to pick it up. I reached for it, my hand trembling, as if I already knew what would happen when I did. I lifted the receiver and put it to my ear. Nothing. Then suddenly, the line crackled alive. "You're finally here," the voice said, its tone cold and familiar. "I've been waiting for you." I felt my stomach drop, and the room spun around me. This was it. The end. The phone calls had led me here, to this moment, to the truth.